All right. Welcome to Lodestone True North Podcast, episode 001. My name is Mark Whitmore, your host. I'm a head coach here at Lodestone True North. And what I do is back the bus off the business owner and put them back in the driver's seat. We talk here about becoming the best versions of ourselves for our families, our businesses, and our communities. And if you own or operate an organization, if you simply want to expand your vision of what it means to master your own destiny for the sake of your family and your community, you've come to the right place. And today I'm going to read out of a book called Culture Code by Daniel Coyle. And this is a book that, this is the only time this has happened to me. I read this, listened to it on Audible, and I got to the end of this book, and I turned around and read it right over again, second time. And when I got to the end, I almost read it a third time, right in a row. So to me, it was that good. So I'm going to read the introduction here. It's a little lengthy, but stick with me. When 2 + 2 = 10. Let's start with a question, which might be the oldest question of all. Why do certain groups add up to be greater than the sum of their parts, while others add up to be less? A few years ago, the designer and engineer Peter Skillman held a competition to find out. Over several months, he assembled a series of 4-person groups at Stanford, University of California, University of Tokyo, and a few other places. He challenged each group to build the tallest possible structure using the following items: 20 pieces of uncooked spaghetti, 1 yard of transparent tape, 1 yard of string, and 1 standard-sized marshmallow. The contest had one rule. The marshmallow had to end up on top. The fascinating part of the experiment, however, had less to do with the task than with the participants. Some of the teams consisted of business school students, others consisted of kindergartners. The business students got right to work. They began talking and thinking strategically. They examined the materials. They tossed ideas back and forth and asked thoughtful, savvy questions. They generated several options, then honed the most promising ideas. It was professional, rational, and intelligent. The process resulted in a decision to pursue one particular strategy. Then they divided up the tasks and started building. The kindergartners took a different approach. They did not strategize. They did not analyze or share experiences. They did not ask questions, propose options, or hone ideas. In fact, they barely talked at all. They stood very close to one another. Their interactions were not smooth or organized. They abruptly grabbed materials from one another and started building, following no plan or strategy. When they spoke in short bursts. Here, no, here. Their entire techniques might be described as trying a bunch of stuff together. If you had to bet which of the teams would win, it would not be a difficult choice. You would bet on the business school students because they possess the intelligence, skills, and experience to do a superior job. This is the way we normally think about group performance. We presume skilled individuals will combine to produce skilled performance in the same way we presume 2 + 2 will combine to produce 4. Your bet would be wrong. In dozens of trials, kindergartners built structures that averaged 26 inches tall, while business school students built structures that averaged less than 10 inches. The result is hard to absorb because it feels like an illusion. We see smart, experienced business school students, and we find it difficult to imagine that they would combine to produce a poor performance. We see unsophisticated, inexperienced kindergartners, and we find it difficult to imagine that they would combine to produce a successful performance. But this illusion, like every illusion, happens because our instincts have led us to focus on the wrong details. We focus on what we can see, individual skills. But individual skills are not what matters. What matters is the interaction. The business school students appear to be collaborating, but in fact, they're engaged in a process psychologists call status management. They are figuring out where they fit into the larger picture. Who is in charge? Is it okay to criticize someone's idea? What are the rules here? Their interactions appear smooth, but their underlying behavior is riddled with inefficiency, hesitation, and subtle competition. Instead of focusing on the task, they're navigating their uncertainty about one another. They spend so much time managing status that they fail to grasp the essence of the problem, which is the marshmallow is relatively heavy and the spaghetti is hard to secure. As a result, their first efforts often collapse and they run out of time. The action of the kindergartners appear disorganized on the surface, but when you view them as a single entity, their behavior is efficient and effective. They are not competing for status. They stand shoulder to shoulder and work energetically together. They move quickly, spotting problems and offering help. They experiment, take risks, and notice outcomes, which guides them toward effective solutions. The kindergartners succeed not because they're smarter, but because they work together in a smarter way. They are tapping into a simple and powerful method in which a group of ordinary people can create a performance far beyond the sum of their parts. This book is the story of how that method works. Group culture is one of the most powerful forces on the planet. We sense its presence inside of successful businesses, championship teams, and thriving families, and we sense when it's absent or toxic. We can measure its impact on the bottom line. A strong culture increases net income 756% over 11 years, according to a Harvard study of more than 200 companies. Yet the inner workings of culture remain mysterious. We all want strong culture in our organizations, communities, and families. We all know that it works. We just don't know quite how it works. The reason may be based in the way we think about culture. We tend to think about it as a group trait, like DNA. Strong, well-established cultures like those of Google, Disney, and the Navy SEALs feel so singular and distinctive that they seem fixed, somehow predestined. In this way of thinking, culture is a possession determined by fate. Some groups have the gift of strong cultures and others don't. This book takes a different approach. I spent the last 4 years visiting and researching 8 of the world's most successful groups, including a special ops military unit, an inner city school, a professional basketball team, a movie studio, a comedy troupe, a gang of jewel thieves, and others. I found that their cultures are created by a specific set of skills. These skills, which tap into the power of our social brains to create interactions exactly like the ones used by the kindergartners building the spaghetti tower, form the structure of this book. Skill 1 is build safety, exploring how signals of connection generate bonds of belonging and identity. Skill 2, share vulnerability, explains how habits of mutual risk drive trusting cooperation. Skill 3, establish purpose, tells us how narratives create shared goals and values. The 3 skills work together from the bottom up, first building group connection and then channeling it into action. Each part of the book is structured like a tour. We'll first explore how each skill works, then we'll go into the field to spend time with groups and leaders who use these methods every day. Each part will end with a collection of concrete suggestions on applying these skills to your group. In the following pages, we'll spend some time inside the planet's top performing cultures and see what makes them tick. We'll take a look inside the machinery of the brain and see how trust and belonging are built. Along the way, we'll see that being smart is overrated, that showing fallibility is crucial, and that being nice is not nearly as important as you might think. Above all, we'll see how leaders of high-performing cultures navigate the challenges of achieving excellence in a fast-changing world. While successful culture can look and feel like magic, the truth is that it's not. Culture is a set of living relationships working together toward a shared goal. It's not something you are, it's something you do. So today I've got sitting here with me Brandon Kenney, who happens to be one of my besties. And he is a owner, and he's the CEO of a company called TTX here in Northeast Ohio, which is how would you describe TTX?
Well, it's a second-generation family business focused on technology, sales, support, and service. So we have about 400 clients in the Northern Ohio market, and we take care of voice systems, managed services for IT support, and project work kind of all the way up and down the stack. Primarily focused on relationships with clients that are more than just the technical utility of the transaction. So we're more interested in breaking some ruts in IT than we are about doing the standard support and services.
Mm-hmm.
But we've got about 40 employees
Mm-hmm.
and headquartered in Strongsville.
Awesome. And your father, and you're not bad looking, by the way.
Even with the COVID haircut.
Yeah, COVID. We're sporting the COVID locks, buddy, various ways. Yes, I wonder if that's going to become a new style, like the COVID,
The style's kind of already in.
Style. Yeah, it's been in for. It needs to go out, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so I want to ask you some stuff. We're just going to chit-chat about your business and about friendship and culture. And I wanted to read that excerpt from the Culture Code, partly because I love the culture at your business. And I love some of your core values, for one, that we worked on. That just, they're so punchy and meaningful. And I want to talk about how that's been working for you, and what your core values are, and how you make them function, and also just talk about your wins and losses at the biz, and how you've achieved some of the stuff you've achieved, and see where it goes.
Cool.
So, why don't you rattle off some of your core values?
Sure. Well, maybe just a slight bit more background. The business was founded in 1980 by my dad and his partner, and I came into the business in 2004 after graduating college, and never really wanted to do anything else but work with my dad. And when I came in, the industry was really at a challenging time. We had for 25 years done voice system support, phone systems, and carrier services, and really transitioning into all that stuff going into the IT space, being on the data network and all kinds of IT technologies. And so I came in at an interesting time when the business was preparing for its second generation, had 25 years of pretty solid success in the voice space, and needed a new vision for where it was headed. Manufacturers changed a lot in that period, as they do often in IT. And so one of the first probably challenges along that was figuring out what's been true of the company since the beginning, mining out from a core value standpoint. We started 25 years ago at that point, now 40 years on in 2020, what's been true since the beginning. And then also some things that we want to be true, aspirational ideas that we want to be shooting at. And I think the core values ended up being a combination of those things. Things where we'd say, hey, these are important to us, always have been. And as I came into the story, 25 years on, had to figure out, how much already existed before I got there, and then what were the things that I wanted and the leadership team wanted for the second generation, and also where do we want to go ultimately. So The first core value is we're people focused, and I mentioned it in a moment ago in the intro, but I think generally speaking in IT and technology, there's a lot of focus on what the product does, and ultimately, too, just fixing problems, just being the smartest person in the room. And that is not what most businesses actually want. Of course, you have to be able to fix problems, but most technical organizations are not focused on customer service. They're focused on having smart people that fix problems. And most of the businesses that we work with, which maybe an average of 150 to 200 employees, are concerned with a lot more than just fixing problems. They're concerned with how satisfied their workers are with the technology they use. Does it help them sell more? Does it support their clients and the way that the clients interact with them? And so they're looking for somebody to ask the next question rather than, was it up? Were all the lights green? Which is what you get a lot of times when you call your cell phone provider or your internet provider or in IT, and ask questions about how does the technology need to work for you, and ultimately as an organization, are we checking all the boxes for a client rather than just being the electric company keeping the lights on? So the way that we describe that core value is that it's a three-way people focused. So we're focused on our employees first, and what we found as I've been leading the company is that that we'll have satisfied clients if our people feel cared for. So the less that our folks feel that we're caring for them, the less that they're prone to take care of our clients. And it seems like a no-brainer once you iterate it, but when as a leadership team we were wholly focused on the client experience rather than being focused on our employee experience, we were kind of looking past the most important part of the client experience. And so the first part of being people focused is U, meaning the employee, plus TTX equals happy and healthy. That's right. H squared. Y plus TTX equals H2.
Yeah. Y plus TTX equals H squared.
Yep.
Love it.
Yep. And it's important to us as a family business, as I've said. There's a lot of cliche around family business, and we're guilty of that language sometimes. But we do want people that are looking for that kind of transaction where they matter, and that we know each other, we know what's happening in each other's lives, we get to know each other. This time during the COVID-19 stuff has been difficult because we've been spatially separated. We're used to being together, and it's made us value what we maybe took for granted, which was just being able to see people, bring donuts in on Friday, make coffee, open the door, that kind of thing. It's a big part of the satisfaction I get out of work, and I think for a lot of our folks too. But we want that to be a successful transaction. And I think a lot of IT businesses, that is not necessarily one of the main tenets of a good working relationship. It's more about how much you're compensated and how good you are at fixing things. And those things are important. I mean, obviously we have to work on that platform of those things, but really those are kind of table stakes. So we need people that can fix problems, and we need to pay people fairly. But that ultimately isn't going to make us the most trusted partner in our market, which is our vision, what we're shooting for. So so we look at it from an employee standpoint, and then we look at it from a client standpoint, of course, that we want clients that are having an interaction that they're enjoying. So in that regard, we really don't talk much about contract term, because we have standard terms of length of contract with a client, 24 months, 36 months. But if a client's not happy, or likewise, if a client is happy, I expect them to stick around for regardless of the amount of months that are remaining on the contract. And if a client isn't happy, then we're happy to let them out for whatever reason. Not every partnership works out. And so we're not looking to hold somebody into a contract just because they signed it at one time believing we were something that we didn't end up being, or vice versa. So we want happy, healthy interactions. And
is that what the H2 is? Happy, healthy?
Yeah,
so
happy and healthy.
Plus TTX equals happy and healthy. So Y plus TTX equals H squared. That was a lot of fun making that. Yeah. By the way, I couldn't remember where we had that parked in which core value, but do your guys, as you've been sharing that with the team and clients, are people What's people's response to that? Y plus TTX equals H squared.
Yeah, I think it's cool because it's the meaning's a little hidden. It's not overt like so many words are.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the next word in
Integrity.
yeah, well, camaraderie is the next word, which could easily be considered a cliched word, but
Well, it's a whole lot less cliched than integrity or
yeah, honesty, integrity, truthfulness, that kind of thing. But I think just calling something out on the table with everybody that we interact with, so that applies to our employees, our clients, and our partners too, the organizations we partner with. We're looking for relationships that work both directions, not just one where we distribute product and the partner, we're one of 1,000 partners that distributor works with, and vice versa. So that measurement is, I think, beneficial to call it on the table and say, this is what we're shooting for. So we're not shooting for one of those hollowed out business agreements that somebody makes money, somebody gets a bill of goods or services, and we walk on. Yeah.
Huh. So when you're interacting with a client, well, when you're pitching a client, let's say, I don't know, somebody with what's your kind of average size, average users?
Average client size is around 100 users, 100 employees. Depends on the product. Sometimes it's larger, and that's kind of the target market for a lot of things.
So at that point, I know you got a sales team and all that, but at that point, are you interacting with the principal?
Me personally?
Yeah.
Occasionally. Depends upon, but sometimes, yeah, for sure.
Do these core values come up, or do you mention them? Or
the first bullet point, I use a very simple, when I'm doing a corporate presentation, whether it's for a business event we're doing where we're talking to prospects or clients at the Indians game, which we're at a lot, or it's or a direct presentation with a client, something in our office or their office. The first bullet point when I talk about who the organization is that first core value, people focused, and the fact that we want to call out right at the beginning of the meeting that that we're looking for engagement where we matter to each other. Not just to clearly define a scope of work written down to the very penny and a dollar amount and a billing rate that's knocked out to the exact, not an iota more, but that we're looking for a trusted relationship. And in relationship, there is some give and take, but ultimately we want one that's built on the variable of a relationship rather than a bill of goods or scope of work, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I see that it's disarming in a sense for both sides, because I think it's in the deal. Ultimately, they understand that they're trusting us to do certain things that would be considered a relationship, and of course we're doing that, trying to get them as a client. But to talk about it in a different way, I think, kind of puts some fertilizer on the soil of the conversation, rather than just trying to generate trust by doing a really good job of talking about a proposal or showing the product perfectly.
Features and costs and performance and all that. What about around hiring and firing, or recruiting and reviewing employees?
Yeah, I think the core values are at the center of that, and the as much as I said it's a well-worn rut, I think in IT to be more focused on the technical ones and zeros and the utilitarian nature of it. That's true of the people that are out there in the job market as well. A lot of the engineers are used to that type of training, where it's how many acronyms do I have after my name? I have this certification and that certification, and really I'd be much more interested in somebody who had certifications in customer service or people trusting them, lots of friends, good communicator, which are things that are much more important to us and ultimately much more evident when we have a successful engagement, is that we demonstrated those tools. So when we get into a review, oftentimes we're looking at how many tickets were closed, how many projects were successful, and those are the things that I think most IT professionals are looking for in their review. And we're taking it much more toward the relationships with their peers in the organization, relationship with clients.
Yeah.
The kind of things that are getting said about them and the things that have the way that they fit in the organization. So that one's a big deal. And it's hard in IT. Most of the work we do is remote. And so right now we're all working remote, but generally speaking, you're dealing with emails and conference calls, ticketing system. And so you can lose sight of the person on the other side of the phone or the email or whatever. And so one of our, what's emboldened on our conference room wall is imagine the client in the room, which is a cliched thing. It's been burnt out, but I think the way that we're looking at it is not cliched, in that when you ask the question, how do we become the most trusted partner in our market? One of the easy answers for me is just imagine the client sitting next to you in every decision you make. I think it takes that's a really big ideal, Brandon. How in the world can we become the most trusted partner when it's something that is we're never going to get that label? Maybe we'll be thought of very highly, but there's no Cranes Cleveland or COSI nomination for the most trusted partner in the market. So we're shooting for something that's a little squishy. But if we acted in every interaction as if the client was sitting there with us, so the way that we respond to a ticket or the way that we handle an invoice, client overpays an invoice. If they were sitting there, what we do, always send them the balance back. How would we write this proposal? We write it in the way that the client described, even if it's more difficult for us to do it.
Yeah.
Does it make sense to call this person or just send a simple ticket update? Well, it makes sense to call them because they called me, so I should give them a call back and let them know what happened. Those type of just putting the client in the room, I think brings that down to a really practical level, and it's a nice little true-false test before taking an action you're not sure on.
Yeah, one of the things in this book, he spends some time with Danny Meyer out of the New York City. Can't remember the names of his restaurants. Shake Shack and some others. I'm drawing a blank right now, but he is really good at teaching all of his employees how to put themselves in the customers, and food service or restaurants, especially in New York City, incredibly a lot of competition, very much a commodity, going out to eat. A lot of people go out to eat all the time, and great food is in some sense a table stakes. Everybody's got pretty great food.
Yeah.
And he has this way, and you see it in the book, of teaching his employees how to remember the patron's kind of plight or the patron's angle, and that the patron is there in business because the patron comes in and spends money and is happy, essentially, and it really also he's figured out how to train his folks with catchy little phrases like Y plus TTX equals H2. Is very, very interesting, kind of little catchy, in some ways dorky quotes. The gal that there's a gal that did a 6-month her doctoral dissertation on the culture at Danny Meyer's company, and so she spent 6, and Danny Meyer said, you can do that, but you got to work here for 6 months. You got to actually go through the process of becoming an employee and learn it from the inside out. And one of the things she said was she felt like she had joined a cult early on, a mixture of a cult and church camp or boy like summer camp or something, where they had these like just sing-song little statements and sayings, and at first seemed to her very trivial, but then realized everybody actually believed them and lived by these codes, by these little sayings, and it was one of the ways that they were able to take their culture and really repeat it and really make it have legs to it, have action to it, not just be posted on the wall somewhere. So, yeah, it was interesting.
I think that is one of the biggest challenges that they have obviously captured. Makes me, it reminds me of just how far away from it we are when you hear a story like that. As a leader, sometimes it feels like you sound like a broken record to people. You say your core values, or things like imagine the decline in the room, or y plus TTX equals h squared. You picture their eyes rolling, even though they aren't, maybe, most times not, but you just picture like, hey, here we go again.
Yeah.
And I've had to push through that myself, the mental block for that, just to understand, the fact that she said it felt like joining the church makes sense, because it does, like, it is an indoctrination of some sort, where you're saying, like, this is how we do it, and if you're going to be one of us, this is how we run.
That's how we roll.
And it's hard to not feel like you're just pushing too hard on somebody to continue repeating it. But obviously it's working for him. I mean, he's got incredible success.
Well, that was one of the common factors in all the cultures that he looked at in the book, is that insane amounts of repetition around really simple coding. Hey, this is who we are, this is where we're going, this is how we're going to get there, this is how we do this is how we do that. It's almost, he called it overemphasizing microprocesses, I think was how he said it. And especially, a little bit of familiarity with SEAL Team 6 kind of stuff, Navy SEAL stuff. They have this saying, it's shoot, move, communicate, shoot, move, communicate. And these guys are at the top of their game. They don't need to be taught how to shoot, move, and communicate, but they see it as that much more important to oversimplify the basics and keep the basics right up in front of everybody's head, So anyway, that was a common factor in all the cultures that he looked at, was that the leaders understood that they needed to I'm sorry, I'm fixing my bra strap here. The leaders understood that they needed to overlook that hitch in their leadership step. It's almost like you feel like you're insulting their intelligence. But what we don't remember as leaders is that the vision that's in our head naturally, like, we think in terms of that vision. We're like, don't you see it? And everybody else is like, no, actually, I don't. I have no idea what you're seeing. So that repetition can feel really unnatural, but
it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
One of the other core values that we maintain is elite, which I have seen both on the client side and the employee side be a good catalyst for a conversation about the fact that we're shooting for elite.
And what do you mean by elite? How do you describe that?
So the way that we're looking at it from a client perspective, so if you're going to be the most trusted partner, if you're going to get that kind of label, then you got to be doing a lot of things elitely, obviously. And communicating elitely is one thing for sure. So a lot of people aren't looking for elite when it comes to the market that we're in. They're looking for good, it's good enough. And price comes in, and so you say, hey, we're just looking for something to check the boxes here. Probably the biggest one of those is when somebody issues an RFP, request for proposal. They're basically saying, hey, we've defined what we want, just provide us with this exact bill of materials. And we don't traditionally haven't done that well in RFPs, because that's not the language that we're speaking in. We're speaking in a much more much more specific and elite way, that we want the solution to not just check boxes, but surpass expectations around the different variables that they might have. So the way that we're describing elite, from both a client perspective and an employee perspective, can say, well, I actually just kind of look at this as a job. So I'm not necessarily looking to be an elite operator in this area. And I could see that when you were talking about Navy SEALs and envisioning those guys as the elite warriors, can see the parallel where not everybody is looking to be a SEAL.
Right.
They joined and they're in, and they're going to do their tour and serve well in different areas, but not necessarily looking to achieve that type of thing. It's not. There's lots of good reasons not to be a Navy SEAL, and there's people that have good reasons to be one. So that jogged my mind in terms of elite, that clients aren't necessarily looking for elite operators. They're looking for somebody that's good enough, and I think oftentimes employees are looking for an employer that's just good enough, looking at it as a job.
So if you come across one of your 40 folks, and let's just say the guy's name is Bob, and Bob's like, I don't want to. I just want to be okay. I just want to get the job done and go home, or, pretty darn good, or,
Yeah.
B minus or B plus. I don't know what
Yeah.
non-elite would be, but would you fire him, or would you sit him down and be like, dude, Bob, listen, you're in the wrong. You got the wrong mindset here. That's not who we are.
Yeah.
What would that look like?
Yeah, well, that's a fair question. There's probably two levels. One, I mean, me personally, I probably wouldn't be able to fire him because of the way that my mind works. I'm believing that somebody is going to make that change. My CEO mindset, which took me a while to figure that out, but also just being a dad with 4 kids, 4 girls, that mindset creeps in where I'm trying to woo somebody into a better way of thinking about it, envisioning that person has the capabilities to think the way that, because it's a better way to think, to want to be elite, and if you've chosen that as your career. And so for me personally, that's been one of my biggest leadership challenges, is being able to draw a line in the sand and say, it's not working out, it's not a fit for whatever reason, versus always, waiting for things to turn around and finding the news I'm looking for, a positive turn, a better response to this or that, the right things said in a review meeting. But ultimately we should, I think it's probably an opportunity to say, well, we're shooting for this and you're not. So we've got a misalignment of a key objective. And so let's help you find something else.
Would you, I mean, your style and personality and all that come in, but would you take that, would that make warning flags pop for you? If guys like, I'm B+, that's all good,
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, yeah, for sure it makes warning flags pop, but I think a lot of where somebody might answer the questions that way may have more to do with where they're coming from in our space and the way they've been trained to think. And you have to kind of be willing to have your paradigm shift a little bit, I think, not that we're so radically different from every other IT company out there, but the fact that we are so focused on the client. I think maybe giving somebody the freedom to do that is to kind of give them an awakening of, it's not just about being efficient. That movie, you actually referred the movie to me, and I watched it, Little Prince. It was an old book about how the businessman has ruined everything because it's all about efficiency, and so he's pulled all the stars down, and he's got them churning energy for the city, and that idea of efficiency is such a big deal in IT, and I'd prefer not to be efficient, but have clients that just absolutely loved us, and it's hard to do both of those things. So.
Yeah, so that another book I'm reading, the book that I started reading when I really wanted to read that a third time is Team of Teams by Stanley McChrystal. And he is doing a great job of painting 2 different worlds. One is, efficiency, bureaucracy, hierarchy, command and control kind of structure, versus dynamism, just the integration of pushing decision making down into the ranks where teams can kind of modulate around, and it's really a different. It's much more relational, much more natural, human. The one's kind of mechanical and the other one's kind of human, and it's very powerful. It's way more effective. He's in this book. He's actually using. They're fighting Al Qaeda in Iraq, and he realized they had a better system than the U.S. military did. Even though the military had tons more of everything, that you could name, and just like in this example with the spaghetti stuff, it doesn't make sense that kindergartners would smoke all those people. And they later, in other versions of the same test, they have engineers and attorneys and CPAs, and the kindergartners smoke all of them every time, you know? And it's just because they have a better way of working together, and they're not worried about hurting each other's feelings and all that stuff. But they've pushed that decision making. They've gotten it really refined. And there's just no BS in there.
Yeah.
You know, we get all this BS baked in when we grow up. And anyway, so the core value stuff is a great way to DBS your company.
Yeah.
I'm laughing because I have some clients that haven't gotten the memo that, you know, they have some BS core values.
Yeah.
But anyway, what else you got? So people focused, you got elite.
All about the flag.
Yeah, I like that one.
And yeah, that goes with the 40 years on now. Folks that respect the organization and have each other's back. I as we is one of the ways that we describe that. I've got your back. We win as a team, and like all those things. Probably all those things could be considered cliche. So, it is what it is. But when you really exert those on a day-to-day basis, and like have an interaction with an engineer who's dealing with an issue with a client, and relays the circumstances and escalate it to me and say, hey, it might make sense to make a phone call. Circumstances are outside of our control, but I think the client, is frustrated with the situation. And the fact that we've got a leadership team that's going to be accountable to make that phone call, that day, and then follow up with that engineer. CEO, president of the company, not necessarily responsible to a systems engineer to make sure that call gets made, and then to follow up and let them know exactly what was said in the exchange and defend the actions of the engineer. But that's the culture we want to have, where a guy who's been with us for a year or two, and is maybe further on down the organizational chart, knows that the president feels responsible to him or her to get something done on their behalf because they escalated it to them. And I've got your back. It's like we're asking them to be on the front lines of engineering, and when they ask us to take care of an escalation or would bring it up as a question or concern, to know that we've all got each other. And one of the probably things that makes me proudest is when I see the selflessness of the I as we happen in our culture, where we'll get on a project kickoff call and the project manager will congratulate the sales rep on a great deal. And the sales rep will say, I only got it because the last one you guys did was so awesome. Wow. And, they only signed another one because awesome. You guys, and there's putting on that mentality of where, as an organization, in most organizations, you kind of have the sales and executive, management, and then you have operations, and oftentimes those two, there's kind of this false sense of war between the two, even though you're on the same team. But it's what sales selling and promising, and what the executives want to do to grow, and then operations trying to get it all done and feeling like, maybe they're taken for granted or overlooked in the day-to-day. And when you have both sides complementing each other and winning for each other, and when you sit down and you talk about, hey, we've got this first deal, but we've got another one coming if this one goes well, and the project manager being able to, or the engineer being able to respond to that positively and saying, oh yeah, no, really, no kidding. You said that last time too. I know you need me to be perfect in my role. Instead saying, yeah, we're awesome. We're excited about this. It's a great client to work with. We're having a lot of fun on these jobs. And those things that actually happen, it's not just what we want to have happen, but hearing guys, that core value of I as we go deeper manifests itself in our weekly meetings and stuff like that.
I love that. When we worked on that and got that to pop out, I was like, yes, that is a great core value, all about the flag.
Yeah.
Have you had any of your guys push back on any of these because you posted them lately, right?
Yeah, lately.
Anybody be like, I didn't sign up for that.
Not yet, but they're relatively new. I think there might be a opportunity to recheck on that one. I'm sure that there are some that hit people more strongly than others, and they see themselves in that value a certain way. The last one, the last core value is eyes wide open, and so it's a little the category is really more individual focused. So we've got a lot of stuff that are the values of the organization, and then we have values of individuals individually that kind of make their way into that category. And so we have constant learning is one of those things, just investing in yourself and being a reader and a learner and being that kind of person.
Constant,
but also the
learning,
self-awareness. So going back to your question about how does this hit people, I think it's really hard, and I'm sure some of it came up in the intro to the book about, not necessarily being nice. Nice isn't necessarily the best way to have a great culture. I've made that mistake as a leader a bunch, and trying to give people what they want to hear and keep people in a positive place rather than being direct. And I think most folks when they look at good core values like the ones we have, don't give themselves Fs. Maybe they'll say, hey, I have some work to do in that area. But I think most people, when they evaluate themselves with some objectively positive variables, would say, yeah, I think I'm pretty good there. I'm pretty good there. And they need direct feedback from somebody to say, no, actually you're not good there, or you got a lot of work to do, and here's where it has to happen. And that's one of my weakest areas. Yeah. From a professional standpoint, is not always banging the drum and telling everybody that, hey, you're doing great. Like, it'd be cool if you worked on this a little bit, but you're 10 out of 10, man. You're green. You're great. And that's been something I've had to find that voice.
It's funny with the kindergartners because they'd be like, hey, get off my thing, or hey, you did that wrong, or whatever. Just direct. I mean, I don't what it is, because I'm the same way. I have a hard time with candor in scenarios where I feel like somebody might say, well, you did that wrong, where they throw it back on me, and I want, anyway, candor is a tough deal. It's a tricky.
Yep. Yeah, and I could see with the kindergartners in that example where, there is no fear of like, well, that guy's not going to like me on Monday if I, tell him his idea stinks, or, can fire me, or he's going to, write me up or whatever. There's a lot of nuance to the hierarchy within an organization and how that plays out and how honest you'll be with somebody, both directions. One of the areas I've found over the years is that people have been afraid to give me bad news because I'm a positive person. So, there'd be things that would leak out to me rather than from direct reports about something that happened. And
you would think they would be. So I'm just thinking about that. So if you're a real positive person, logically, you should be able to take bad news really well. Like, oh yeah, it's all right. It's all good. So it's funny because as you're talking, some of my clients, it's like these opposites are at play. So the employee is worried about getting fired way, way too much. And the boss is not firing people nearly enough. I mean, it's like the opposite ends of the spectrum. Bosses need to be firing people a lot more over like real lack of buy-in to their culture and all that. And employees need to not worry about it as much, because the boss is far less likely to fire you over anything. Typically, anyway.
I think it's I think that opposites is very true in my experience as well. And the thing with candor that I have found most challenging is, as a leader, you're trying to keep the ship running. So what you want is everybody to start the day in their best spot, and it can feel scary to put somebody in a place where they don't feel like, hey, my boss thinks I'm doing a good job, and they respect me and appreciate what I do, and so I'm gonna start my day working for the leader that I respect and appreciate, versus a leader who would be direct and say, here's some things you need to work on. You're doing these things great, but here's some things you need to work on, and be really direct about those things and talk about what a big deal they are, especially if they're a breach of a core value. We've had that where we haven't dealt with that head on, and it is a breach of a core value, and it tells the organization something that's really cancerous, which is that ultimately that the values are maybe aspirational at best, but they're not as practical as they want them to be, because they met with that guy. He has this issue. I know he does, and nothing changed. It doesn't even seem like they talked about it. That would be the way that you'd come out of that meeting. In fact, the guy walks out of that meeting, and he's kind of a proud guy, like, hey, I just had a great review. And everybody else waiting for those core values to be the tools that get used.
That guy's a dickhead, or whatever.
Yeah,
I don't know. So,
it's an affront to the value of them, for sure.
Yeah. It's interesting, like in a family, as a little kid, when you see your sibling really needing like corrected and they don't get corrected, then you kind of as a kid you start to go, there's some BS in here. You don't maybe have the language to describe it, but there's you start to like get bad as a kid, where you're like, I'm all right. There's a Far Side. Tristan, my kid, he and I love Far Side comics, and we were laughing the other day about one. It's these two guys are fishing out. These two old codgers are in a little rowboat fishing, and you see way off in the distance a silhouette of a city, skyline of a high rises and all that, and there's a mushroom cloud where there's like a nuclear bomb went off. And then one guy says the other is like, you know what this means? Screw the limit, dude. we're fishing all day. Screw the limit. And, that's good. And that's kind of like with the little kid where, when the parent is saying, here's the deal, but then the parent mistreats the other parent.
Yeah.
That little kid's like, all right, the rules are out the window, and it's every man for themselves, and I'm just going to make it up. And it's – so that's one of the things about these core values. And I see this in this book, and I see it with my clients. I see it in lots of other books from Good to Great to, you name it, around culture, that you've got to have it super simple. They've got to be very these what's the word? They got to fit in your hands entrepreneurially. They can't be unwieldy, and practical and so forth. So, what's your? I think you have one more, right?
So
one more missing here.
Maybe before we scoot, one of the things you said was when we were doing the core values is that as leaders you got to keep them at a 10, and I found that to be true. Like if one person maybe breaks a core value, like something where you say that the client's the most important thing, and they come into a meeting have a bad attitude about a client for some reason, they know they're in breach of that. That's like it happened. You had a bad day. If that's not normal for that person, then you move on. But if one of the leaders does that, says something like that in a meeting, or something gets found out that somebody did something, it's like that thing got broke 20 times, 50 times. Right. It's just like that thing just got blown up. Yeah. And that's one of the things that I found to be really powerful about the core values when we put them on the wall. And we put a lot of the other things about the brand on the wall too, is just things that are in our platform, is that there's just no hiding from it. And so you hang them on the wall, and so you're sitting in the conference room where it says, imagine the client in the room, and then somebody starts to go down a bad path. It's right there on the wall. Like it kind of stops you in your tracks. We have one of the ways that we define trust is character, and we've got a definition of character. It's in the lunchroom. So conversation in the lunchroom turns the wrong direction about anything. It's like character is right there on the wall, man. It's one of the values. And as a leader, to walk around and basically always maintain those values is a high standard. It's one of the cautions probably in doing core values and putting them on the wall is that it could probably have the opposite effect of culture if the leaders aren't sustaining those values personally, where it's like basically just derided the belief in the organization rather than built it up.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, it's kind of like, well, there's your problem. You know, if you've got a leader who doesn't want to unearth the truth of their core values, and B isn't wants to just keep on keeping on, what they don't realize is that everybody knows what the real core values are anyway. Which it might be cover your own butt, you know, and watch out for number one, and they're there, you know.
Yeah.
And so the problem is tends to be that you got a leader that actually has low character, but their values are permeating the culture. You know, that's just a truth of organizational development. I think that. It's just the same thing in a family. You know, you take a kid that's the son of mom and dad. The kid is full of mom and dad's DNA. The kid can't do anything about it. Like, it's just in there.
Yeah.
And if the kid's like, nope, I think I'm going to change chromosome 27 to, you know, it's like, sorry, buddy, you just can't. You know, it just is what it is. So culture can be a little watered down, that idea of culture, but it just comes from the leaders, period. You know, they embody it, and whatever you embody is gonna roll down through, and you see that over and over in all of these cultures that he looks at, and also you see in these cultures that he looks at the real willingness to speak frankly and candidly about performance and about you know, places where people aren't maybe not measuring up so much, because it's not so much about performance, and actually being in a healthy culture increases performance ridiculously. It has a major impact on that, but still there's this candor thing, so that's interesting. So what's your other one? We got 4 here.
Philo, which is a play on an accounting term, is first in, last out.
What's the accounting term?
Well, there's LIFO and LILO, the different way you bring money in and take money out. But it's not that, obviously. It's first in, last out. The way that we describe that is not necessarily like we want people coming in before 8 and after 5 burning out. As a matter of fact, we speak really directly against that and want to keep people from that edge. But it's about owning the outcome. And so we say, we own the outcome, give me the ball. There's a great scene in that movie, We Were Soldiers, the story of Colonel Hal Moore, where you see him fly into that field, and he's the first boot off the they really zoom in on the helicopter when he's getting off, and you see his boot step onto the ground, and then when they've completed that whole thing, when the skirmish is over, after whatever happens, how many days it was, he's the last boot off, and they zoom in again. The camera zooms in on the boot there again, and he makes that commitment to the troops as they're heading out that he'll be the first one on the field and the last one off. And I think that's what is definitely true. And this again goes to the leadership team being willing to do that, as well as engineering and operations, project management, sales, everybody. But being willing to, the client is in desperate need of us when they're in need of us. There isn't a single aspect of the business that can run without the technology that supports it, whether it's accounting, customer service, finance, sales, income. So when we support those products, the client is basically could be in a standstill without us, and they need somebody who's going to say, we're going to own this thing and fix it. And we're not going to point a finger at another vendor or whatever. There'll be a time maybe to go back and review what happened and why, but in the midst of it, it takes what it takes. And that's been one of the things that's been true of the organization since the beginning. That was one of going back to mining some things out and things we aspire to, and all that has always been, to do whatever the client needs for us to take care of them. And that's probably the one that I could have seen operations folks in particular even ask the most questions about. So are you asking me to work more hours than you're paying me for? Or are you asking me to sacrifice my personal life and that kind of thing? And that's not it at all. In fact, we work actively to make sure we have the right amount of folks and that we're not burning people out. But there are circumstances in IT where you do need someone to just stay the course and stick it out. And those circumstances come up, and we've got to be able to do that. And that's one of those things that I think could be like a good litmus test for the right kind of person or the wrong kind of person. Is this a value that you have in your life? Where you say, hey, once we get started, we're going to finish it. And I'm not walking away from this. I want the ball. I want to be this. I want to save the day for you. I want to be the hero for you, and I'm not leaving until the day is saved. Or we're at a place where we can, call it good, or just like, hey, whistle blew, and Fred Flintstone out the door.
Right. I was just thinking of that. Wilma. What was the other guy? Barney.
Yeah, Barney.
Oh man, that's funny.
So yeah, those are the 5.
Nice. You want? I'm gonna get some tequila.
Okay.
You want some?
Yeah. Cheers, mate.
So, not to wax eloquent necessarily, but when I thought about getting into business well, actually, I didn't think about business coaching. Let me back up. But this kind, having somebody like you as a friend and a client and a compadre, if you had said to me 15 years ago, hey, this is what this was gonna look like, I'd be like, you're lying. There's no way. There's no way it could be that good or that fun or that meaningful. That's really what drives me. All of us, I think, is meaning and purpose, behind our businesses. But it just having folks like you to work alongside them. The same thing with these core values. It's just like makes it all worth it. So it's a lot of fun. So
yeah, cheers.
Cheers, buddy. What I was going to ask you is, if you were talking to and kind of one of the purposes of this podcast is to be able to capture the thoughts of a high-level practitioner of kind of the organizational craftsman, the organizational artist who is saying, I'm gonna put my hands on a group of people and shape them into this thing, and it's gonna be beautiful, and it's gonna be effective, and we're gonna win, and not financially necessarily, although finances is a great way to keep score on some stuff. It's an easy measure. But if you were sitting here, if we had some, well, let's say, so when did we meet? What year is this? 2020. So
09.
09. Yeah, and you were just rocking into that spot.
Yeah, I was just taking over.
Mm-hmm. So if we were sitting here, and if that guy was sitting here 11 years ago, and you're like, listen, buddy, let me help you with a couple things here. Yeah. Let me, let me boil this down into a little cheat sheet. Like if you were to put on this little yellow slip right here, point 1.
Yeah.
Don't or do. What would that be? Like, give me some ideas that you would do for yourself that you wish somebody had done for you. Maybe.
So in that circumstance, I put a few names down not to hire, which is probably, is maybe not the direct answer in the question where you're headed with it. But people are so important, and for a small business, when you give somebody a platform to operate, they have such an impact on your brand. That would be one of the things I wouldn't leave that piece of paper without. Putting down a few names.
Don't hire
this
A,
guy.
B, and C.
Avoid this circumstance. Yeah. Yep.
Well, could you? So that's really interesting. Could you? What if you had? Would you be able to spell that out into an archetype or a prototype or I don't know what I'm looking. Avatar. Like, don't hire a person like this. Or is it maybe more specific?
Yeah, it's hard. It's so hard because of. It's hard for me to say, what has happened as a result of the working through those things and realizing who we are and establishing our core values. So we didn't have the core values back then. So, just having the core values may have taken us off of making some decisions that we made back then to be able to run people through that filter. And I believe that's true of them. And so, figuring out the core values back then would certainly have been something on there. I think, and this goes into what does Brandon Kenney know about family business as a result of being in one for 15 years now and second generation owner and all that stuff. I bump into a lot of folks that are a lot of family businesses, tons of family businesses, obviously, and lots of second and third generation guys taking over. And I think a lot of those businesses fail. The statistics are like 60% or something of second generation businesses fail in their second generation. And one of the things that you really helped me with early on in our relationship was just understanding the relationship with my dad, and taking that thing in and of itself and working through it. I was confused, frustrated with where I was in the company. I think most sons or daughters who take an active role in the business and have been doing it for 5-7 years, there's a lot of expectation associated with someday you'll take over, or you have a voice, and I'm talking about the ones that aren't the stereotypical owner's son ones that screw everything up. So I have that ghost chasing me around every day, to not be that son who is ashamed to his father and runs the business into the ground. But the ones that are good, I think most of those folks, there's a struggle, and I had to get past some things. The fact that TTX is as healthy as it is today is a testament to me figuring some things out, and I give a lot of credit to our friendship in that, and also my dad too. It's equal parts, him and me both. Yeah. But one of the things to understand, like advice I would give to myself then, advice I would give to a second generation or however many generations on, strife with previous generation parents, is it's their company. So you got to start with that paradigm that you work for their company. So they don't owe you anything. Most second, third, however many generations it is, most of those people never put a resume out, never dealt with getting laid off or fired, never dealt with an honest performance review, always had the security of a job. And when you've worked so hard to impact your family business, maybe you feel like you could have earned more if you had worked for another business and sweat equity and all that, you can develop a resentment and I've seen that a lot. And I was in that position for a time, and I've seen a lot of people in that position where you lose sight of the fact that it isn't your business, that they dug it out of the ground, own it, operate it, and just because you are leading there and maybe are looked at as the leader of the company at the time or going to be, does not entitle you to make ownership decisions necessarily. And so for me, I just had to get over some things and forgive my dad. And he deserved to be forgiven. It wasn't like I had to, he didn't do any.
You didn't have to like muster
thing.
It up.
It was like, I just realized like this is the transaction here. You strip everything away. He owns the business. I have a job to play here, a role that I'm playing, and start with that, because I've seen a lot of next generation guys act like they're peers with their dads, or like it's time for you to get out, moms and dads, whatever. And that doesn't work, especially for that era. I mean, you're looking at the Depression era folks, like my dad being born in the 40s. They respect hard work, and they dug it out of the ground and really focused on and having a good business and all that stuff. So the first advice that people ask me, like, how'd you pull it off? It's like, first step was I had to forgive some things and just have an open stance to my dad instead of just fighting about stuff all the time. And that was on me, because he owns it. So if you want to be here and play by those rules, you got to get over yourself. He doesn't have to go anywhere. He's the last guy to go.
Let's be clear.
Yeah, and I think that there's a lot of guys that get hung up on that I've seen. And it wasn't a move that I understood then, but in retrospect, I understand it well. So that would be one for the 09 Brandon. Would definitely
so would you say, so the forgive thing, would you say just open-handed or hold it loosely, or I say
humble yourself before it, and say, because most generation, they intend to pass it down. It's not that it's an affront to what they intend. It's just the way it's going down. The way it's going down isn't working. Maybe they're not ready to let go. Maybe they don't have a parachute that they can pull. And so they're fighting back. They're pulling things back from you. And as a son, you can feel like, well, you don't respect me. You've given me this thing. And now it's like, no, it really doesn't have anything to do with you. It has to do with where they're at. Like, what am I going to do? I'm not going to be the CEO anymore, the president anymore. I'm not going to have that. And I'm already picturing where I'll be 20 years from now, letting go of being CEO. And it's going to be hard. To not be the man when it comes to that kind of thing.
That's interesting. I was thinking about, when my daughter got married, I don't know how long it's been now, year and a half, 2 years or so. It's like it came right up to that time, all up to the point of the wedding, the moment of the wedding. I was like, yeah, this is a great idea. And then when it got right down to it, it was like, wait. Look, can we give this a week? Can we just kind of, there's a point where she was coming out of the house and getting into my truck and where I was going to drive. You were there, right?
Yeah.
So we were going to drive down the driveway. The wedding was at my house on the farm, and I drove her in my truck to the wedding tent, and I just was like, I don't have to drive down this driveway.
Just keep going.
I'm just going to put it in reverse, If we go in reverse and just go back in the field, just like, hey, have a kind of just, can we just pause? Yeah. So, but anyway, I think some of that with the parent of the business, there's kind of like, you mean this is the end? And there's just now, on the other side of it, there might be like, I'm just ready to be done with you and get out of here, and just, so maybe it's a retirement thing, but it could be, and it just depends on how unruly the business is or how painful the business has been, maybe. But even if it's been difficult and painful and unruly, there's still this kind of transition from, oh, you mean like my part's over, and
yes.
And it's kind of like, now it's time to put me out to pasture, and so that's a tough. So what's that look like with your dad? How have you found, as you've done this transition slowly over, well, it's been 10 years, you've
10
been
years, 11 years, 11 years this year.
So your dad still comes in, right?
Yep.
He's still in the office and all that. What are some ways that you've helped him find productive ways to not be out to pasture or to be kind of productive as the old horse,
Yeah, well, there is an element of that you can't escape. And I think that's probably the most important reason why the next generation has got to humble, because there is a sense in which it has to be their time. Because if they own the business and they haven't transitioned, however the financial structure of the company is, they don't have to let go of it until they can't do the job anymore or pass away or whatever. People can die in that chair as leader of the business. There's businesses like that all over the place who never succeeded.
Or you find a guy propped up on his desk and it's like, well. If that person, that generation is not prepared to pass it on, they don't have to do that. Yeah. And so what you got to do, I think, and it's not strategy as much as it is just being sincere about it, is you got to humble yourself before that and say, hey, it's your business. I have thoughts and I have opinions, but and I want it. I want to run the business, and I'm throwing my hat in there. I want it, but ultimately it's got to be your timing. And there's people that end up leaving their family businesses when they get that honest about it, but most of those were in a bad place for 10 years before they finally broke free of it. Yeah. And other businesses were, it doesn't resolve itself. The first generation doesn't. Or previous generation doesn't relent and can't let go. And a lot of that I give credit to my dad for, because ultimately he was the CEO. He was the man. It's a partnership, so he had a partner and they were, had equal parts in the business, so they shared it. But in terms of the organization, CEO and, directing things, and he had to decide that it was time
but I think that I put him in, with my approach to him, enabled him to make that decision, put him in a position to make that decision. That wasn't like us fighting. It wasn't me feeling like I've been doing this and I'm entitled to it and you're doing it wrong. And he's sitting back and like, well, I don't like the way you're doing it, so I'm going to keep holding this thing. I don't want to let go of it anyways, so I'm not gonna. But if you say, hey, you know what, this is yours. It's something like if you love something, you set it free. And it loves you if it comes back to you.
I was thinking of that song a little earlier. I'm like, that'd be great.
I think there is an aspect to that. But I think one of the other things, once you get to that place, is recognizing that there is something really significant about being essential that we take for granted when we are essential. And I got a hobby in amateur radio, so talking on ham radio, there's a lot of guys that are retired in that, and they don't have a whole lot to do. And looking at watching the weather and hoping for a better day than yesterday, and a lot of that has to do with the weather and stuff that's happening in our world. And I'm in a position in my life between my kids and running the business that if I don't get up out of bed an hour or two later, my phone's going to be ringing. Where are you at? And at some point we get to a place where you can stay in bed for a couple of days and you're not going to really get any phone calls, and that's a scary idea.
Yeah, that's right.
And I think that's one of the things that that fear, when I get to that age, I'll have some perspective on, is that you do have to build yourself a life after being an entrepreneur. And it could continue to be an entrepreneur in other type of things, whether it's social, your community, your church, or being a grandfather and living in that, or different types of charities and social work kind of stuff. But you do have to have some things that make you essential, especially if you have that entrepreneur mindset. Because those type A, go-getter, aggressive, hardworking people, you can't just shut that off. And when you have a second generation, or I keep saying second, but multi-generation, you have that next generation coming up, it does kind of feel like I either keep this job or I shut it down. And then what? It's incredibly scary to say, what do I do with myself? Like if I don't come in, if I'm not needed to come in, if nobody needs me here. And so specifically with my dad, he's playing a critical financial role for the organization as VP of Finance. So he's got 40 years. The company was founded in 1980 of seeing money come in, money come out, or money go out, and a lot of different times, economic times, technology, different products and services we had, partnerships. And so I've just got him watching the numbers every day, receivables, payables, all the ways that the inflow and outflow of money, and watching for anomalies, basically, to say, what does that, you've seen that 1,000 times before, looking at money, basically the financial aspect of the business 365 days a year for 20 years or 40 years. You've seen that before. So what should we do about it? What would be some things to do? And in most cases, his hands aren't on the actual levers and switches, but we've got, and again, I give him a lot of credit for this. We've got a relationship where he doesn't necessarily need to, and he's playing a role, and he's built other things in his life to spend time into. So there's a combination of things there. And he's also humbled himself before me, candidly, to say, hey, it's your time, which probably wouldn't have happened if I hadn't done it first. I think that's maybe we'd have gotten there eventually, but I wouldn't have had anything to do with it. It would have been in spite of me instead of being a contributor to it, that he could say, hey, I think it is your time. I'm going to step down. So he and I have the best relationship we've ever had. And we had that relationship going through some of the most trying times of a transition of ownership, where it's like actually him stepping out and myself and my partner Scott stepping into it, my dad's partner's son. So it's in a sweet spot now. But yeah, that's going back to your question of what would I tell myself 11 years ago. Put some names down, say, hey, just get over this thing, get ready. Just respect the premise of the relationship between you and your dad. This is his business, and you need to get over yourself. Would be definitely the second one.
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm thinking of a couple of, well, man, if I think about my clients, at least half of them are in some sort of direct, heavy-duty family scenario in the leadership team. Ownership, leadership, brother, father, wife, daughter, son, others, nieces and nephews. So it's a little complicated.
Yeah.
So how have you, as far as like roles, like, I hate to use the word performance, but if you own a baseball team and dad's out there pitching, and dad owns a baseball team, you're like, hey, dad, your curveball really sucks. It's time to move on to coaching or move on to PR or something, right? How have you and your dad, or have you and your dad talked about, or any of the other relationships in the business talked about, how have you been able to take off that kind of I'm your relative, or you're my partner's relative, or right? Any of that, just kind of take that off and say, hey, we're just talking about your fastball right now. And we need that thing to stay at 95 miles an hour.
Yeah.
And if it's down to 91 or 89, we're in trouble. And we're going to start losing games.
Yeah.
What does that look like? Or what sort of advice would you have for somebody who needs to have that conversation with their relative?
Yeah, well, man, there's so much there there's so many tools that I could say. First, I think it makes sense wherever you find yourself in that family business to take stock of your position relative to the other folks that are there. Because in a family business, there's a lot of benefits. There's significant downsides, but there are some great benefits. Like I said, you're one of the last few people that's ever going to get fired. A company's got to basically be completely dead before you're going to lose your job. Yeah. And you never had to go through an interview, and maybe you have a vehicle, maybe some certain expenses are paid, and different ways in which you've been taken care of because you're a member of the family. And to look at that honestly and to look at it from a position of gratefulness. So the business that exists has done that for you, and you didn't start it. And I think we have a sense of entitlement that wells up there a little bit about, you take a lot of things for granted, like it's always been there. So it just feels like that's what it is. And so I'm talking about the things on top of all that I'm frustrated with, rather than looking back at everything. And because I think that's one of the things that is missing from most of those conversations is genuine gratitude from the next generation to the previous generation. Good, bad, or indifferent, the platform that's been given to them, to me, is not to be taken for granted. And I think many of the previous generations, they feel taken for granted in the language, the tone, just the way that the conversations go. And I think when not feel taken for granted, then the conversation really can open up. But, timing's everything. They say timing, I found that true in my marriage. Timing is everything when it comes to bringing up certain topics and discussions and things that, if there's something that you need to discuss or an issue and vice versa, timing is so important to the right answer. And if you don't set that conversation up for success, then it probably won't be successful because people are going to be stuck in their spots. But so money is a really important aspect of all that. So money, everybody says money to them is not the most important thing. I don't know that I've met anybody that just came right out and said, I want this job for money. And that's really all that matters to me. So I'll do what you tell me, but I'm doing it because, that's it. And but it's way more important than anybody's willing to say. You know, obviously, we'd all spend our lives differently if money wasn't a part of it, and if money wasn't an essential transaction associated with working. Doesn't mean that we wouldn't work. It just probably would change a lot of things. And money, I think, is a powerful tool in that regard. I look at the fact that TTX is growing and healthy financially as an aspect of our ability to impact things positively, not necessarily bottom lines and bank accounts, but how we can take care of employees and how we can take care of family scenarios, in a way that protects the business. So, I look at that, and everybody, there's different things that different family members want from the business. Money is a part of it. And I look at money as a conduit for the kind of things that we want to happen in the core of the culture of the business, how we want our name to be used in the market, what TTX means to people. And if money helps me build the brand that I want to build, then it's a great tool. But it's not the end. So you can leverage money to fix problems, the family problems. I mean, it might be that a family member is just focused on the financial aspect of it, what they need to get out of it, or vice versa. And so that's a card on the table, a chip to be moved around. And that's one of the biggest reasons I look for financial health.
So if we're sitting here, so we talked about your guy, yourself, or your buddy, or, somebody 11 years ago. But if we're sitting here, what is this, 2020? So let's say we're sitting here in 2025. And Brandon Kenney saying, hey, TTX is ABC. What is that? You did it. You did it. You won. You nailed it. It's the kind of awesome you hoped it would be. Size, impact, feel, MO, reputation, whatever.
Yeah.
Just number of folks, type of product.
Well, I'd say, as sitting in the seat that I sit in, CEO role, I see a lot of that is in culture. Mm-hmm. So like, if you were to say, like, what do you see for sure? What would be a win for you 5 years from now? It would be all around. I would be walking around in the building, and I would be able to describe for you the attitude of our people, which lines up with our core values. So just so focused on satisfying clients and so enjoying that work, doing that. And the peace of mind that comes from a day worked well and clients taken care of, and feeling like TTX has been the conduit for that. I've been taken care of. All the boxes have been checked as an employee. A high sense of loyalty as a result. One of the organizations that is often admired is the Green Bay Packers. It's like one of the best sports organizations ever, and most people would say that. Yeah. It has this incredible amount of brand loyalty. Yeah. Like, people are just defines an aspect of them, and there's just you can't. Them having a losing season doesn't change you being a Green Bay Packer fan, a cheesehead, I guess.
A cheesehead.
And that kind of like strong loyalty is something that all the way around it, the fan base, the players, the people that are there, like, that's the dream job, I would imagine, for a coach and a GM and a player and a fan. Everybody is like, you want to be living in Cleveland, I have a little bit of a complex. Not everybody does, but I do. I mean, I wish we had a team like the Green Bay Packers, because I would be a much bigger football fan.
Wouldn't that be something?
But anyways, I see that.
How would you? So I mean, this is, I don't know, is a rhetorical question, I suppose. But how would you measure that? Like, how would you say, look, we did it? So like with the culture is a hard thing to, crossing that finish line, so with one of my clients, as we were trying to devise something like this, I used a hockey team as a example. and said, Stanley Cup, right? And so if you're building a hockey team and you own the hockey team and you're trying to recruit a goalie, you wouldn't be saying, hey, goalie, future goalie, what do you think about this pay structure and, so forth? I want you to, here's all the perks and benefits of being in this organization, and we want to do really well so that I can sell this thing in 5 years, so that our organization is worth X in 5 years. Nobody's buying into that. Nobody. I mean, even though those are realities, but to say, hey, goalie, would you like to win the Stanley Cup? We're going for the Stanley Cup in the next 5 years. We're going to hit it twice, and who's in, and he'd be like, yeah, that's me. And I'm like, yeah, pay and all that matters. But I would argue that it doesn't matter. It matters a lot less if there's real chance of a significant victory, a significant cultural victory. And so how would you measure that cultural victory that you're talking about?
Yeah,
and I know I'm just throwing this out at you.
Yeah, no, I think it's a fair question. The first place my mind goes, just speaking candidly, this coronavirus stuff has shown a real spotlight on, so you're gonna have family dinner every night. What does that look like?
Yeah.
Like, is that awful? Or is your family like,
yeah.
Is your family like busting at the seams because of the amount of time that you've gotten in the house? Which it's an indicator. It's an indicator of culture of the house. So if looking at culture, what is the culture of the house? Well, the culture of the house is really tough for us to get through an hour dinner. It's probably an indicator of a lot of problems at different places potentially in the culture of the house. So from a culture, and maybe this isn't the only vein to answer the question, I don't have a good answer for you from a scorecard standpoint. I'm not thinking of a revenue number or an employee number or a profit number. I mean, those things are outworkings of other things, but what I see is the parallel of a family who is having great dinners 8 weeks into this lockdown. We're still, they're laughing at each other, and they're, just the husband and wife are looking at each other, smiling when they look at their kids, and the kids are, being silly with each other, and they're not, running to do other things necessarily, play video games or watch movies and stuff. So the way I see this, like, what are we working on from a business standpoint? So if you were to show me my rocks list and my issues list 5 years from now, if we're talking about culture issues, like certain employees and their attitudes, or the way that this client was treated, looking at when every ticket is closed, we get there's an automated survey. It's really, really low impact, so it's easy for a client to just click a green smiley face, a red frown face, or yellow, make a comment if they want, but it's in the same page. They don't have to even go to the web. If we're talking about people that are pushing the frown button and saying, hey, guy didn't give me the time that I needed, or the issue wasn't fixed. If we're still talking about those kind of things, then I would say that we've missed the mark, because we haven't driven the culture down. Because right now we're in a position where I don't think we should be having that 5 years from now. Because we're having very few of those right now. But we are having some, and if you look at our issues list and rocks, we have people on those lists that aren't fitting culturally. And if we were to say, we still have these things, where we have a new list, then I'd say we haven't driven the core values deep enough, and we haven't practiced what we've preached in terms of, like, this is what's most important. And I think we have the right protocols in place to be the most trusted partner. And if we have the right culture inside along with the culture code, it plays into that, the first few pages you read. I think the rest takes care of itself. So if we have the right culture, and then we've got the right person running the finance, we've got the right person running sales, we've got the right person running operations, we're hiring the right engineers, we've got the right project managers, we've got the right field engineers, right person answering the phones, and the culture's good, then
everything else takes care of itself.
We're gonna have the right net profit at the end of the day. The business value goes up, and sales are, we grow. We're attracting more clients and adding. But I think that's where as the CEO, I feel the most challenged is that I've got to first be the walking representation of the core values, and then have to keep a very short accounts with people when they're broken, because it does just erode the soil under them if people are allowed to not match up to the core values, and especially if they're important high profile people in the company and they're allowed to not keep the values.
That's good stuff, buddy. That's good stuff. So hopefully somebody out there, some young CEO is saying to himself, he wants to get the Brandon Kenney bobblehead doll. Yeah, right.
Big head. It's a big head with flat hair on it.
TTX on the back. So love it. Well, it's been really awesome talking with you. I love doing this. We're gonna make a habit of this right here, pretty sure. So
I hope so.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, I've appreciated your impact as my friend and as a business mentor, consultant. So it's my pleasure to talk to you about this stuff.
All right, buddy. Till next time.
Yep. Thanks, man. See ya.
Boom. It's a wrap.
It's a wrap.